Hamilton's steering trace looked ordinary until it didn't. On lap 27 at Monza, his SF25 carried 2 km/h more minimum speed through Lesmo Two than the McLarens, and Ferrari's telemetry room froze. For half a season, the car had been their enemy. Unpredictable rear axle, unstable brake balance, tyre windows, impossible to hold. Yet suddenly, the same machine that chewed through rubber and punished mistakes looked serene, calm even. The engineers saw it first. Hamilton's data line was unnaturally clean, a rhythm without corrections, oscillations, or panic inputs. It wasn't just quick, it was perfect. And in that perfection lay a problem far bigger than one lap. Because if Hamilton could unlock this car in a way Leclerc could not, Ferrari wasn't just facing a technical puzzle. They were staring at a strategic crisis no setup change could solve. On paper, the race didn't scream revolution. Hamilton crossed the line 6th, 37 seconds behind Max Verstappen, while Leclerc finished 4th, just over 25 seconds adrift. But inside the Ferrari garage, engineers weren't staring at results. They were staring at behaviour. For half the season, the SF25's rear axle had behaved like a ticking time bomb, snapping suddenly under braking, overheating the tyres, and forcing both drivers into constant micro-corrections just to survive a stint. Yet Hamilton's telemetry told a different story. Through Lesmo Two, his exit speed clocked at 246 km/h, lap after lap, without variance. The tyre temperatures? Stable within a 5-degree band across the rears. For comparison, Leclerc's same sector showed 12-degree swings, thermal spikes that hinted at the instability every Ferrari engineer knew too well. That difference was more than a number. It was a revelation. Consistency meant confidence, and confidence in a car that had been undrivable for months was an engineering earthquake. The steering trace confirmed it. Where Leclerc's wheel inputs danced constantly, tiny flicks left and right to fight the rear, Hamilton's trace was smooth, one progressive arc per corner. No oscillations, no panic inputs, no corrections mid-apex. It was the kind of line you'd expect from a simulator lap, not a car notorious for punishing its drivers. But here's where the shock ran deepest. Ferrari's data showed no electronic compensation, no traction control interventions, no differential overrides, no brake migration saving the rear. Hamilton was doing this on raw feel, transforming the SF25's jagged edges into a straight line. And for the engineers, that raised the first of many uncomfortable questions. Was the car flawed, or had they been misreading it all along? When Ferrari's engineers pulled up the setup sheets, the shock only deepened. Hamilton hadn't asked for stability. He hadn't softened the car. Instead, he had requested the most aggressive differential configuration on offer: wider opening on corner entry, harsher locking on corner exit. Translated into driver language, it meant one thing: chaos on the way in, traction on the way out. For most drivers, that's a compromise too dangerous to risk. The rear steps out, the moment you turn, the car feels like it wants to spin, and you're forced to fight instability before you can think about acceleration. But Hamilton didn't ask for changes. He asked them not to touch it. From Friday onwards, his free practice laps became less about speed and more about education. He treated the SF25 like an unknown language and dedicated himself to learning its dialect. Every snap on entry, every slide on rotation, he absorbed it, catalogued it, and slowly turned it into usable information. Where another driver might demand comfort to build confidence, Hamilton inverted the equation. He used discomfort as a tool. The very instability that had been Ferrari's Achilles heel all season became his personal classroom. The telemetry began to reflect the difference. At Variante della Roggia, where Leclerc applied sharp corrections mid-apex, Hamilton absorbed the car's initial looseness and let the rear slide into position, aligning the SF25 with minimal steering angle and carrying 2 km/h more on exit. At Ascari, his throttle trace was earlier, smoother, unbroken, no lifts, no hesitation. The engineers noted it with disbelief. Hamilton wasn't erasing the instability. He was predicting it, shaping it, and then using it to rotate the car more efficiently than any simulation model had suggested possible. It was a calculated gamble, because this setup could easily have backfired across 53 laps. Rear tyres could have overheated, degradation could have skyrocketed, and Ferrari would have been left with another race of survival. But the gamble held. And the fact it held, not through engineering tweaks, but through one driver's ability to read chaos and turn it into control, sent a ripple of unease through Maranello. In qualifying, the numbers looked close. Leclerc lined up fourth with a time of 1 minute, 19.081 seconds. Hamilton just behind in fifth at 1 minute, 19.124 seconds, a mere 43 thousandths apart, and only 1/4 of a second off pole sitter Norris. To the casual fan, that gap said parity. But to Ferrari's engineers, the lap traces told a story that could not have been more different. Leclerc's driving has always been defined by precision under aggression. He attacks apexes with sharp steering inputs, rings every millimetre of track width, and relies on split-second corrections to balance the car. At Monza, this style produced thermal chaos. The rear tyre sensors showed swings of up to 12 degrees between Lesmo 1 and Lesmo 2, peaks that made the SF25's fragile thermal window almost impossible to maintain. Each correction generated heat. Each recovery cost him rubber. Over one lap, he could hold it together. Over a race distance, the degradation curve was merciless. Hamilton's approach was almost the mirror opposite. His steering input into parabolica was one long, progressive arc. No flicks, no hesitations. Just a single motion that aligned the car's rotation with the natural grip curve of the asphalt. The result? Tyre deltas within a 5-degree band, lap after lap. His exits were smoother, his throttle traces cleaner, and his minimum speeds more repeatable. Where Leclerc forced the SF25 to obey his demands, Hamilton listened to what the car wanted and flowed with it. This contrast was more than philosophy. It was survival. Ferrari had spent months describing the SF25 as fundamentally flawed, an unstable, unpredictable chassis that couldn't keep its tyres alive. Yet here was Hamilton, proving in real time that the car wasn't broken, only misunderstood. Inside Ferrari's engineering trucks at Monza, the mood was strangely muted. Not because Hamilton's 6th place was disappointing, but because it dismantled their story. For half a season, Maranello had insisted the SF25's problems were structural: rear instability, brake inconsistency, thermal runaway on the tyres. Those words justified setup compromises, simulation reruns, and an expensive mid-season upgrade program. Yet in Monza, Hamilton had driven through 53 laps with none of those flaws visible. The same car that supposedly could not sustain balance beyond 5 consecutive turns had delivered one of the most stable long runs Ferrari had recorded all year. That wasn't just a technical anomaly, it was a political grenade. Because if Hamilton could unlock stability through adaptation, the question wasn't what's wrong with the car, it was who within Ferrari had misdiagnosed it for months. Engineers who had championed conservative setups suddenly found their authority under scrutiny. Strategists who had argued for chassis redesigns were left wondering whether Hamilton had just invalidated their months of simulations. There was a historical echo too. In the year 2000, when Michael Schumacher first bent Ferrari's notoriously twitchy rear end to his will, Maranello faced a similar moment of reckoning. Was the car truly fixed, or was the driver simply transcending it? Back then, Ferrari chose to evolve around Schumacher, shaping a dynasty. Now, 25 years later, Hamilton's Monza performance raised the same uncomfortable dilemma. Word travels fast in Formula One. By the time the checkered flag fell at Monza, rival engineers already had their own copies of Ferrari's lap data. McLaren's strategy group was the first to flag it. Hamilton's sector exits were too clean, too consistent to match what Ferrari had been describing for months. For a car supposedly crippled by rear instability, the traces looked like a machine reborn. Red Bull, watching from their command centre in Milton Keynes, reached the same conclusion. McLaren's analysts calculated that Hamilton's tyre stability alone, his 5-degree variance versus Leclerc's 12, could be worth nearly 0.2 per lap across a 50-lap stint. Over a season, that equates to point swings big enough to decide a Constructors' Championship. Red Bull's aerodynamicists, meanwhile, noted something subtler. Hamilton's ability to rotate the car earlier in mid-speed corners suggested the SF25's chassis flex wasn't as limiting as Ferrari's public narrative claimed. This sent a ripple of unease through the paddock. Rival teams thrive on predictability. Knowing your opponent's car has fundamental weaknesses makes strategy easier. But if Ferrari's true ceiling is driver-dependent, that ceiling just became unpredictable. One weekend, the SF25 could be an unstable midfield machine. The next, with Hamilton behind the wheel, it could challenge McLaren or Red Bull on raw pace. Ferrari's greatest strength has always been its driver lineup. 2 proven race winners, both capable of delivering at the highest level. But Monza exposed the fragility of that equation. Because when the same car behaves like two different machines, depending on who drives it, the question isn't engineering anymore, it's philosophy. On one side, Charles Leclerc, aggressive, instinctive, and lightning fast over one lap. His style demands stability, a platform that obeys his sharp inputs, that gives him confidence at the limit without sudden betrayals. To develop in his direction means conservative setups, heavier reliance on aero upgrades, and a focus on making the SF25 easier to drive consistently. On the other side, Lewis Hamilton, adaptive, patient, and ruthless in exploiting instability. His Monza performance proved he can take a car that misbehaves and turn it into an advantage, smoothing chaos into rhythm. Building around him means leaning into that philosophy. Aggressive setups, more mechanical rotation, and a willingness to accept discomfort in exchange for ultimate pace. For Ferrari, there's no middle ground. A hybrid solution dilutes both approaches. Designed for Leclerc, and you risk caging Hamilton's adaptability. Designed for Hamilton, and you risk exposing Leclerc to a car that constantly fights him. Step back from the lap traces and the politics, and the numbers tell a story just as sharp. Coming into Monza, Ferrari trailed McLaren by over 300 points in the constructors' standings, while Red Bull sat within striking distance. On paper, Ferrari were outsiders. But Hamilton's sixth place wasn't the point. It was the way he achieved it. His tyre stability, keeping rear deltas within 5 degrees versus Leclerc's 12, meant his degradation curve was flatter by nearly 0.3 per lap after 20 laps. Stretch that across a 53-lap Grand Prix, and you're looking at a potential gain of 15 to 17 seconds purely through consistency. The implications ripple outward. If Hamilton can consistently neutralise Ferrari's thermal issues, then every race with high lateral load, Singapore, Suzuka, Austin, becomes a new opportunity rather than a liability. Each of those circuits represents double-digit point swings if Ferrari can run closer to McLaren than simulations predict. The title fight, once a duel, now carries the shadow of a third player. What happened at Monza wasn't just a strong drive, it was a revelation. For months, Ferrari's engineers had described the SF25 as unstable, unpredictable, fundamentally limited. Yet Hamilton demonstrated that the car's ceiling isn't defined by its flaws, but by the driver who interprets them. But that revelation has a cost. Ferrari now faces a decision that goes beyond engineering. Do they evolve the SF25 around Hamilton's adaptive mastery, risking alienation of Leclerc? Or do they continue chasing stability for Leclerc, potentially capping Hamilton's ability to exploit the car's hidden potential? So here's the dilemma only Ferrari can answer. Is Hamilton revealing a championship-winning innovation in how to drive the SF25? Or has he simply shown that Ferrari's future depends on picking one philosophy over the other? And remember, this story doesn't end at Monza. In just days, Singapore will test Ferrari in the exact conditions that should expose their flaws: high tyre loads, relentless cornering, and brutal heat. But if Hamilton's Monza breakthrough wasn't a one-off, it could turn Marina Bay into the biggest shock of the season.